Alright, people, so I figured it's been almost a year, I think, and plenty a new warband has come and gone since. These are always a behemoth of work to do, so I'm always kind of like dreading the fact of doing tier list, and opinions will be all over the place, obviously, but that's fine. This is my own personal thoughts. So my tier lists have gotten a lot of views, and that's very encouraging. A lot of people agreed on my tier list, and a lot of people probably disagreed, and that's just in the nature of the beast, I guess. And the thing I've always been doing then, well, I've done it 2 times, is to kind of make a twist on the tier list. So the first one, I think, was based on size of warbands. I could do something similar, obviously, but that's no fun. And then in the second tier list, I did based on Grand Alliance, and I think that worked pretty well, right? Because people often have their like preference in terms of I like Death warbands or I like Chaos warbands. It's maybe useful for them to see the strong points of the different warbands. This time, however, I thought I'd do something different again. I thought this time I might rate them inside the seasons, so that we could maybe see how a potential power creep has been going on and how that might have been tapered down in recent seasons, or not, I guess. So I'm just gonna jump in and start with Shadespire here, which will be a weird beast, obviously, because 2 of the warbands have gotten revamps, so they now have complete rival decks. And I'm also gonna say up front that it is hard to do a tier list now, because if we go back 2 or 3 years, I mean, basically everyone played Championship, right? But now we have Championship kind of living this dwindling existence, and we have the rise of the Rivals format and the Nemesis format. So that's what most people will kind of look to get out of this tier list, I guess. So, but I will still try to take into account how well they adapt to Championship as well. But it's not going to be my number 1 concern, I guess. Which is sad, because I really like Championship. I really do. I just think it's taking a bit of a hit, a huge hit. And I also think the inclusion of the Essential Card Pack really made Championship into this kind of boring format, because everyone will want to include a Great Strength and a Glory Seeker. So, yeah, and probably like a Branching Fate. So there will be staple cards that won't see rotation. There will always be staple cards in Championship, but they will rotate out. But here we now have cards that never goes away, and that just kind of dulls the format down a bit, I think. So that's the intro then, and so let's go into Shadespire. Okay, so jumping into Shadespire here, which I said up front was a bit weird now that we have the Fast Riders and the Sepulchral Guard having revamps and a major increase in power, I would say. So in the bottom, we basically have a tie. I think the Chosen Axes and the Iron Skulls boys are pretty darn weak here. I really like my Chosen Axes, but they really struggle, right? The hard to inspire mechanic, the lack of really good objectives makes you rely too heavily on universal cards to make them work, right? And I mean the abysmal move characteristic and weak defense characteristic. They have good set of ploys, I mean, compared to other early warbands, and a couple of useful upgrades, but overall they are not really that strong. And they inspire really slow. Iron Skulls boys may inspire faster. I think they have a better inspire condition than the dwarves. And they kind of start with the extra wound that the dwarves get after inspiring, if they even do. And they have a similar set of useful ploys, but probably worse upgrades, I would argue. Except from the unkillable, I guess, for Gersak. But not really any strong objectives either. Bad move, really low accuracy on 2 of the fighters, yeah. So, yeah, they're just going to end up very close to the bottom here. Third from the bottom, I'm going to put Garrick's Reavers. They are a fun warband to play, I will never argue with that, and they have some scoreable objectives, I guess, and some really fun ploys. But, I mean, they can't take a hit, and they don't have amazing accuracy. Yeah, you can do some real potential damage with Psych, I guess. But next up, I'm going to put the Steel Hearts Champions. They have solid fighter stats. I mean, they don't inspire all that crappy, I guess. I mean, 50-50 to inspire in defense is pretty darn good, I guess. They have bad mobility though, but they have amazing accuracy and good damage output. But I mean, the deck is as abysmal almost as the other guys here. Next up, I'm gonna put the Spite Claws Swarm, and I think that's mainly based on the high mobility, the race ability, and the really strong inspired mechanic. But the warband hasn't really aged that well. In terms of objectives, they basically have none that are really scoreable. Yeah, arm's reach is okay, I guess. And kill someone with Switch is certainly doable, but you don't really want to go forward all that much with him, because then you might end up losing your resurrectability. But yeah, high mobility and expendable and Black Hunger are really fun cards, and there are some really useful ploys as well. Next up, I'm going to put the Magor's Fiends. They're a solid aggro warband with good accuracy, and Riptooth is a beast. And the stats are not that bad. You can hit back when you are missed in an attack. You have Riptooth with 3 swords, 3 damage, and Magor doing 3 damage as well. So yeah, I think they are, for an early warband, quite strong. Next up, I'm going to put the Fast Riders. They would not have been this high with the old deck, but now they have gotten this revamp, and I think they are quite a good aggro warband. They are probably just below the middle of the road in terms of overall on all of the seasons. In the top, though, I am gonna put the Sepulchral Guard. I've given these guys a couple of tries with a new deck, and I think they are quite solid now. Probably also middle of the road, because they still bleed a lot of glory. They have gotten a slight increase in defense, but that's really slight, because 1 shield is still pretty darn bad. But they now have scoreable objectives, and I mean, they've always had useful ploys. So yeah, the Sepulchral Guard will end up in the top, and they are also really a good candidate to mix with the Paths of Prophecy to really make them strong with the whole objective style. I mean, they can punish people as well. I mean, they have some decent damage dealers with the Harvester and the Champion as well. The Warden has actually gotten slight nerf, weirdly enough. No longer do 3 hammers, 3 damage inspired, but you will basically never go forward with him anyway, so it's not really a big deal. So yeah, that's the Shadespire season then. Alright, so next up we have the Nightvault, and the introduction of magic came in this season. So let's see how these guys fare. Oh, I think we have some good candidates for bottom spots here. I think, yeah, so I'm going to put the Godsworn Hunt in the bottom here. I love my Godsworn Hunt, but they are really weak. They have some fun stuff like Grundon going to 3 damage and Thedra going to 3 damage. So basically, by putting a +1 damage on either of them, you can take them from 2 damage up to 4 damage immediately. And they have a good inspired mechanic, but that's pretty much it. I mean, Wyrdhollow, the dog, Yagathra, they are really, really weak fighters. I mean, Yagathra can do 2 damage on the shot, sure, but that's a 1 fire solution. They are basically torpedoes that you send in to get killed and hopefully kill something in the process. But the deck is really bad. If you have access to the Power Unbound, is it? You can have the kill someone with 4 wounds for 2 glory as well. I guess you could print it if you play your home games if you don't have access to it. So that'll be a very welcome inclusion in this deck. And you have fun cards like Dark Destiny, and that could really skewer the game if you can't pull it off. 50-50 to survive when you are getting killed on an important fighter. So I mean, I have had success with them, but that's just me being nostalgic and wanting them to work basically, but they are not very good. So they're gonna hit the rock bottom spot here. And then I'm going to put Dice of the Nine next to them. I know a lot of people that makes them work. Play this Norwegian dude who was really, really strong with them. So I mean, but for most people, I think they are 2 siblings here are extremely weak fighters. And they die like flies, right? Or like birds, maybe I should say. But the fact that you can summon the Blue Horror and just annoy your opponents. I mean, if your opponents are coming to you and you are summoning the Blue Horror behind them, they kind of have to choose their fights basically. And that, yeah, you could potentially score a lot of glory with the Blue Horror. So I think that's what's raising them up from the bottom spot. But I mean, in terms of objectives, upgrades and such, they're really not very strong. Next up, I'm gonna put the Iltharis Guardians. They are not all that bad. I mean, Nightvault was a bit stronger than Shadespire. I can't really argue with that. And putting the Axe guy up front could give you a decent gatekeeper. And Ilthari is a decent spellcaster as well. There is pretty good accuracy on the sword bloke there. Yeah, I mean, accuracy-wise, they are not bad overall, actually. But I mean, the deck struggles and hasn't aged all that well. But I mean, they have decent mobility and decent damage output. So in terms of fighter cards, they are okay. Then we have Thunderic's Profiteers. They have some pretty good fighters there with Thunderic. The other guy there with 2 hammers, 2 damage, and cleave on the 3 range attack is also really strong inspired. And also the Balloon Man is also pretty good. So they have 3 really solid fighters. And I think the inspired mechanic, the promotion thing, is also really good. So I think they can do both a bit of aggro and a bit of objective play quite good here. Yeah, deck, as all other Nightvault decks, hasn't really aged all that well. Next up, I am gonna put Stormsize Cursebreakers, I think. I mean, they are just a much weaker version of Dominance, I guess. The deck is pretty bad. There are a couple of useful spells and a couple of good upgrades, and there is actually a restricted objective then when you cast a spell, which is really easy to do with them, since you can basically just use their fighter cards to empower, right? Yeah. So I mean, they lend themselves well to the Seismic Shock deck, and I mean, you can certainly make them work in Championship as well. Next up, I'm gonna put Mollog's Mob. Mollog is still a very potent fighter. The other dudes in this warbands are obviously nothing to speak about. Yeah, you can have a fun time with the Stalag Squig, I guess, annoying your opponents. Don't have any really good searches, they don't really have any good end phases. So they really need to make use of something like, what's it called? The one that makes you into husks, basically. Yeah, I'm gonna put it in the graphics here, so it's not really a big issue. But that also works pretty well with them. And next up, I'm gonna put the Sarbag Skits. Same thing there, they are kind of behind in the power creep curve, I guess, but the fact that they are 9 fighters just makes them very good candidates for Paths of Prophecy and general objective play. And the, what's it called? Scuttle? Skrittish? No, there are so many words like this now. But they can basically scramble when another fighter moves and you're next to him, you move with them. If they ever revamp this warband, they will probably remove the need to not have a move token when you do so. So maybe that will make this reaction stronger. And you can do some real damage with the squigs, and the bomb guy is back to inspiring on its own, so that's a good thing. They lack some really strong own objectives and searches, so but you can obliterate is a fun card, and also the objective where you can get 2 glories from killing someone with upgrades, I guess. Yeah, next up, and in the top actually, I'm going to put the Thorns of the Briar Queen. I think they are really strong. The fact that they have so many fighters and still have 2 fighters with 4 wounds is something that in this time was just too strong. But they still are very good, and the Inspired mechanic is pretty strong. The Queen and Varklav are amazing fighters. The Everhanged is also very good. And some really nasty cards in there to punish your opponents. So I think they are the strongest Nightvault warband. You may disagree on some of the orders here. I'm not really sure. I'm totally in line with myself here, but I think the main point here is to put the Thorns of Briar Queen up front here. I think that's. I know we had some disagreements in the last tier list that Mollogs are even stronger, but I'm talking here about how most people will make them work and how they work with other decks, and how a player of a decent skill level can make a certain warband work. And I think they will probably have the easiest time with Thorns and probably the least easy time with the Godsworn Hunt, and that's my main point here. So that's the Nightvault season. Let's move on to Beastgrave, and in the Beastgrave I am gonna include the Dreadfane expansion. Alright, so we have arrived at Beastgrave, and the Dreadfane expansion will be included in this part of the review. I think this is quite a tricky season to manage tier list wise, because it's so many warbands here. In the bottom here I'm gonna put Grashrax the Spoilers. They have fairly low accuracy, low survivability, and they do have some useful ploys, some useful objectives, but I mean the upgrades deck is really lacking. They don't have amazing mobility even, so they don't really have a lot of stuff going for them, except like the sheer number of fighters, I guess. Draknar starts with 3 damage off the bat, but that's about it, right? So you make use of the ritual counter for an early cheeky shot with him. So, I mean, potentially you could get the glory going early, but they will be swingy at best. And they are too frail and have too bad defense characteristics to really lend themselves well to do objective play in any meaningful fashion as well. So I guess your best bet with them is like aggro. Next up, I'm going to put Scath's Wild Hunt. The defense characteristic on these guys are slightly better. The accuracy is slightly better. The mobility as well. I think it's just an overall more well put together warband, right? So I think, but they are still fairly weak. They don't have any super scoreable objectives really. So they also really lack that internal punch, I guess. They need to be built to make them work, and still they are not on par with some of the more middle of the ground warbands here. Next up, I'm going to put more greats. They are also very dice dependent. If you look at their own deck, a lot of the searches require kills, which they certainly can do. I mean, there's a fun combo you can do with the Whip Lady, right? When you make both attacks, and if you may miss the second attack, you could play the reaction to remake the whole attack chain, basically. So you could potentially get 3 hits off in a single round, but activation, sorry. But that's just a niche case, and they have some like passive glory for hitting the same fighter 3 times. Which you can also then score in the same activation if you are lucky. But I think they lean too heavily on killing stuff and fairly killable fighters, right? They have better defense stats than the Greshrax, and they are just slightly above Skates in overall deck composition. Next up, I'm gonna put the Iron Souls Condemners. 3 move on 2 of the guys and 4 on the bloke with the heavy hammer. Weirdly enough, that should probably be the heaviest to carry, but I'm not sure about the logic in that. But anyway, they do inspire to shields like other Stormcast warbands, not all other Stormcast warbands, but like Steelhearts, for example. They inspire on crits in defense or attack roll, which can also be swingy, but I've also had several cases when I inspire all of them in the same, in the first round, basically. And they have great damage output and great accuracy, as many other Stormcast warbands. Next up, I'm going to put the Wormspat. Just slightly better survivability here, since of the... I'm not sure what it's called, but if you roll a defense, a shield in defense, you can reduce the damage by the amount of shields you roll, basically. So yeah, that's a very neat little mechanic. Yeah, Sepsimus can be a real menace here. And I mean, the other guy is also very potent with those 3 hammers and cleave. The leader is probably the weak point in this warband. Does not inspire to shields like the other guys, and hence has a lower chance to reduce the incoming damage. But she's pretty accurate on the magic attack with hitting on lightning is inspired. Next up, I'm going to put the Grimwatch, and this is mostly due to objective play being more valid again, with objectives being turned up, and the introduction of the Paths of Prophecy deck, I think, will probably work very well with them. They can resurrect fighters. The weak point with this warband is that they bleed a lot of glory, but their inspire mechanic is kind of hard to shut down, so they are not all that hard to inspire. I mean, they are a larger warband, so they don't gain a massive amount of power from inspiring, but still, the slight increase in accuracy and damage output is welcome. Next up, I'm going to put Lady Harrows. These have been a tormentor of mine. I haven't played them a lot myself, but I have been kind of exposed to them a lot, I guess. And I don't think they are as abusive as they were. But now that the objectives are turned back up again, I think their like passive glory has taken a huge bump in the right direction again, right? So with moving through objectives and stuff like that. And so they have a good array of passive glory, and they have some nasty stuff on their fighter cards as well, right? When crits doesn't work in defense and stuff like that. And they have a push mechanic on the leader inspired as well. So they can be a real menace, and they can deal a lot of damage, and they have good survivability on those 2 dodges. Next up, I'm going to put Wrathgorn here. Maybe I should have put him below Lady Harrows, but if you get his glory rolling and his personal power snowballed into having like 5 or 6 upgrades on him, he can be really devastating, right? And he has amazing accuracy inspired, and you all inspire them at the same time. The cat is also not a bad fighter. And the fact that he has 8 searches in his deck makes card building not all that hard for him. So he's very decent in rival and in built formats. Next up, I'm going to put Morgox. These have been a constant high-tier warband since their introduction. They were introduced at the same time as Morgwraiths. There is a lot of space in between them in power, I would argue. Morgox have taken a slight nerf in how they inspire now, but still like the push mechanic on the leader, the fact that you can bump up damage with the wall counters, and a very strong own deck makes them a top tier warband still. Ripas I'm gonna put in the lead here, though. I've just seen them constantly perform very well in all formats and all seasons basically. They have great mobility, awesome damage output with a potential to do a lot of damage in the same activation with the Snarlfang's reaction. They can play slightly passive and they can play very aggressive, have good survivability. I mean, they have amazing upgrades with like Bonded and Boss Hat and very good end phases, I would argue, as well, right? So I think they still deserve the top spot in this season. So yeah, that's Beastgrave for you. Okay, so I said that Beastgrave was hard, so I'm gonna have to eat my own hat now, because I think Direchasm is even harder. Oh man, there's a lot of great warbands here, and I don't really think that any one of them are really bad. I think even in the last spot here we have a decent warband. I'm gonna put Kagras in the bottom, just because their inspired mechanic is a bit weird and wonky, and the fact that they can't really hold objectives while at the same time desecrating them just makes them a weird beast. But they aren't bad. I mean, they have good damage output and they have good accuracy and some scoreable stuff and some decent cards, so they aren't really bad, but they will take the last spot here anyway. Next up, I'm going to put Storm of Celestus. They are probably very, very close, if not tied with Kagras. They aren't really, I mean, if you position them in a way that you can pull off the guard reaction with the dog, so you clump them up in the beginning of the match and you could have a good time. But, I mean, people will read into that and try to avoid it as best they can. I think they have probably a better shot at performing well now with the Paths of Prophecy and objectives starting phase up. Their search objectives are a bit weird, that you have to score hold after an opponent's activation. But I think they can perform, and if you play them smart, you can probably do very well with them. Next up, I'm going to put the Dread Pageant. They could place higher, sure, but I think they're kind of hard to wrap your head around for someone new to the game. And their inspired mechanic is pretty hard to pull off, even though I've managed a couple of times and people I've played against have certainly also managed, but it's just pretty slow, right? You have to have 6 wound counters on surviving fighters after an activation, and that's just pretty hard and might be counterproductive to your general game plan. So don't try to inspire at all costs, right? You shouldn't be tunnel visioned into thinking that you need to inspire to perform with them. They do have some good passive glory, like charges on everyone's, and some pretty damn good end phases as well. My Aris, I'm gonna put even higher, though. I think that their survivability is stronger, even though they are actually lower in wound counters. Probably in total wounds, they have 12 wounds among them. The Dread Pageant have 9, 11, 13. So yeah, that's just barely nudges them. But they all inspire to 2 defense dice, which does not happen for the Dread Pageant. Majoris lend themselves well to control, aggro, flex, really anything. And they have some amazing ploys that manipulates the way that you can use the 80 quartz counters. And they inspire pretty darn easy. And they are pretty beginner friendly in how they inspire as well. Starblood Stalkers I'm going to put next. They are kind of frail, obviously. They bleed a lot of glories, and that's why they don't place any higher. But they now perform pretty well with the objective style going back in, right? So if you know how to pull off the skittish reaction in a good way, you could inspire them pretty early. And the ploy to push 2 hunters are a very good bet to inspire them early. One is Device, and yeah, I mean, there are a lot of good cards in the deck. Yeah, but they do bleed a lot of glory, and that's also the case for the next position here. Cadence Reapers, they have an amazing leader, which is just a beast of a fighter, and their deck is amazing. So that's why they place this high, but they also bleed a lot of glory with the little guys. A lot of 2 wound fighters that are on 1 defense. So they will just die like flies. So you'll really have to position Kanan as a gatekeeper to try to avoid that from happening. But you can't really shut it down totally. But they do have an amazing deck. The reaction chain can be amazing. You can pile on a lot of accuracy and potentially a lot of damage with the netherite. Next up, I'm going to put the Crimson Court. These guys are expert 2-wound killers. They have great accuracy and very strong objectives. They are mostly single dice defense though, and that's why they don't place any higher. Next up, I'm going to put the Drepper's Wraith Creepers. They are 2 dodge on the leader and the drummer, and the other guys will be very soon. So you just have to protect the 3-wound fighters until they inspire at least. But the push mechanic is great, even though it's nerfed now. And they have really strong searches and great upgrades like Point of Death and what have you. I don't know. Strong cards. Headcrackers I'm going to put in the next spot here. The Kings of Primacy, and they can potentially score a lot of glory. I think they have pretty good end phases actually, and they do have some strong searches as well. Tooth Dagger is an amazing fighter. I think they're all pretty good fighters, except for Daco, I guess, which is just the weird hang around. But he can at least pull off his primacy reaction better now that the objectives are back up again. So I think they are deserving of the second spot here in this season. I'm going to put Elethanes up in front though. They're just like the kings of shutting down enemy glory and manipulating the flow of the game, and have amazing accuracy in round 2. So just make them survive round 1 and you should be fine, right? And you could do move plus charge with them in first and third round. Yeah, I think the deck is very well composed, and they are just a very strong aggro warband, I think. And the fish is super annoying and will score you a lot of glory. And if he won't score you a lot of glory, he will at least shut down a lot of glory from the enemy. But I think overall in this season we have a lot of strong warbands. You could really pick up any warband here and probably perform at least very decently with any one of them. So I think Direchasm is a great season, and probably my favorite season of all the seasons, both in like flavor of the warbands and style, and I love painting all these guys up, maybe except for Storm and Celestis, which I don't really care about, but and maybe the Slaanesh warband isn't really my cup of tea, but all the other guys I really loved painting up. So yeah, that's Direchasm for you. So we are now moving away from 10 warband seasons into the faster paced release schedule that we were introduced to from Harrowdeep onwards. And in Harrowdeep I think we have a very clear last position here with Black Powders. They have been buffed since, so they aren't as abysmal as they were, but I still think that they are quite weak. They have atrocious upgrades, a couple of objectives that you could certainly use. But, I mean, overall, the damage output is just lacking here. Basically, all of them have 3 swords with Grievous or something similar inspired, except for the leader who has a better damage output. But you need to get rid of swag counters to shoot more times than the one with him, basically, or do like worse versions of your attacks via ploys or stuff like that. But so I just don't think they work very well, and they are like mechanically bad put together as a warband. And I think, yeah, sure, the buff has made them more playable. So if you have a masochistic tendency in your personality, pick them up and try to perform with them. Flavor-wise, they are really cool, right? The Great Pirate and the Parrot and the Monkey and the little 2 piratey Noblars, they're pretty cool, right? And one of my favorite warbands to paint up, but I mean, power-wise, they are just not very good. Next up, I'm going to put Sandire's Truth Seekers. These are pretty solid. These are, I mean, it's middle of the road aggro warband, and they have a weird inspired mechanic, sure, but some strong reactions paired with dying on the storm costs. And yeah, there is some scoreable stuff in the objective deck, and certainly some useful cards, but overall they just lack that final punch to really nudge them over the middle of the road kind of area here. Next up, I'm going to put the Exiled Dead. This is a warband that's a bit technical, but in the right hands, this warband can be very potent. My one caveat is a lot of the mechanic relies on the leader being alive, and he's not really that survivable. He's just 4 wounds and a single shield, uninspired or inspired. So you just have to protect him very well to not fall apart, basically. Yeah, sure, there's also Regulus and Apprentice Markov, and that team is also very, very good. So there is a potential for a lot of damage inside the single activation with this warband, with the dance dynamic and all that stuff, and the puppeteer action. But they will be a little bit swingy, because if your leader gets killed, you can potentially be shit out of luck. In the top, I'm going to put the Cunning Crew. The Inspire mechanic of this warband is just so good. Have support in either attack or defense. You don't need to succeed, just have support. And there's a lot of stuff in the deck to help you have support. I mean, they're amazing. Torka, he supports from 2 hexes away. You have the little guys, they count as 2 supporting fighters. Yeah, an amazing warband. I think they're really strong. And they actually have pretty good damage output as well. And decent survivability. So, yeah, I mean, the leader has 5 wounds, the little guys have 2 dodge, and the moneybags reaction is also pretty useful, actually. So, yeah, I think these deserve the top spot in this, and they just bleed less glory than the Exile Dead as well, right? So, yeah, Cunning Crew is on top for me here in Harrowdeep. Alright, so Nethermaze. I think this is overall a stronger season than the previous. Overall, the power level here is slightly higher, I would argue. But in the bottom, I will put some really cool rats, skitterchunks. I think it's mainly due to their objectives being a bit hard. I think they don't really have any super strong surges. They certainly have potent fighters, I really think so. But I think the deck is just, there's nothing really punchy with the deck. I mean, in a build format, they can probably perform pretty decently, and they have some cool reactions, right, with the bomb and the stagger and all that stuff. So I mean, a smart player will be able to do well with them, but inside this season I can't really see them ending up anywhere else than the last spot here. Next up, I'm gonna put the Gourd Chosen of Drum. These are pretty solid fighters stat wise, right? They have good survivability. They are just single defense, but there's a lot of wounds to trudge through for enemies. Gorehulk is 6 wounds inspired, and he will be inspired. He starts off pretty inaccurate, though. The reason for me not putting him any higher is, I mean, the ploy deck is pretty weird, right? I think 7 or 8 out of the cards are bound to having the leader alive. And sure, yeah, he's 5 wounds, but once he's dead, you will have a lot of dead cards. And they are just 3 fighters with 1 defense die each, so it can potentially be a bit frail. But they are certainly not a bad warband. Next up, I'm going to put the Shadeborn, though. They are a bit more flexy and versatile in their playstyle. They also have good accuracy. I mean, their wounds-wise aren't amazing, but I mean, the leader is very accurate and have a big chance to do 3 damage on the Grievous. And the other fights are not bad either. Just a bit frail, but I think the deck is just slightly better than the Gourd Chosen variety here. In the top, though, and that's, for me at least, quite an easy pick to place Hexbanes in the top here. I think they are pretty frail, but that's also part of the mechanic that makes them strong. So when you kill someone, you will be punished for doing so. And they can also score end phases from having dead hunters, right? And the dog's reaction was also very strong to pile on accuracy here and position yourself in a way that you can land a lot of hits. I think just overall the deck is very well put together. You can potentially score a lot of glory, even though you will probably also die a lot. But I think you will, in most cases, outshine your opponent by doing so. So I think Hexbane certainly deserves the first spot in this season by far, in my opinion. Alright, so we have arrived at the Gnarlwood, and here I think it's very easy for me to put the Sons of Velmorn in the last position here. Oh, they're just a frustrating gang. I've seen them win a Bugman's Clash, if I'm not mistaken, but I think that's more down to the skill level of a certain player really liking the style of the warband, more so than any innate power of the actual warband. They require crits to inspire, but they all just have 2 dice. Basically, most have 2 swords in accuracy, except for the leader, basically, starting out. So they are really hard to land any hits and really hard to inspire. You have the sibling rivalry to inspire 1 for free at the end of the round, but that's also pretty slow, right? They are also pretty frail, all except the illegitimate son and the leader. And the deck is struggling overall, I think, so I don't see them placing any higher than this. So a bit mechanically weird in the same way that black powders is, I guess. Yeah. Grin Crack is coming up next, I think, in the hands of a player that have really wrapped his or her head around them. They can do amazingly well, but you also have this kind of blocked objectives. I mean, they're not hard to score, like do a charge and succeed with it, but if you put it on a fighter and that fighter fails that charge, you have like this blocked search just lying there, not being able to be scored for the rest of the round. Meanwhile, if you have a similar search in a regular warband, it's a regular search card, you could just try to do another charge and then score it. So I think the quest objective is a fun twist. I'm just not convinced that the mechanic is really good. And inspiring the leader is also pretty hard, right? You need to have 3 surviving inspired fighters for him to be inspired. Then he's pretty good. That'll be very slow. The Wonky Lance is a great fighter, and an early charge with him can really get the glory tipping in your favor, I guess. So protect him at all costs, because he's probably your most important fighter. But yeah, the quest objective mechanic is hard to wrap your head around, and that's why I think they don't place any higher. Next up, I'm going to put Grisel's Arena. They are very frail, but they have a lot of mobility and the potential to do some damage, right? They have actually pretty decent accuracy as well. And they are not all that hard to inspire. Maybe the Shield Lady is pretty hard to inspire because she needs to roll a crit in defense on 1 dice, so she's probably the odd one out. But overall they are pretty easy to inspire. The leader is pretty darn good inspired. And just like Morgwaiths, they all inspire in the 3rd round, if not before. So, but I mean, they are lacking a bit of power in the deck, I think, to really compete at the highest level. And this is a pretty uneven season because the power level gap between the Sons of Velmon and the top spot here with the Null Spirit Pack is huge. It's like an ocean between them. Null Spirit Pack is so good. You have all of the Oath objectives that gives you extra glory for showing it, and it's going to be hard for your opponent to shut it down. I mean, they have great accuracy, great damage output, and I mean, the deck is just strong all over the place in upgrades department, in employee department, and in search and end phase department. So even after the nerf, they are still a top warband, an S tier warband for sure. So that's the Gnarlwood season. Alright, so let's wrap this up by doing the Wyrdhollow. I think this is pretty tricky to rate. Number 1, I don't have an amazingly large internal data to go by here because I haven't played them all that much, but I think I will try my best anyway. I think Skabic is the bottom spot here, and I think still it's a very potent warband. I think this is a pretty strong season overall, actually, but I'm gonna put Skabics in the bottom position here just because of the fact that they will bleed a lot of glory. They only have 1 defense die and low wounds overall. But I think their mechanic is pretty darn strong, and they have definitely scoreable objectives here. So if you can just avoid dying off too early and maybe play a bit passively at first, you can still perform very well with them. And putting the little useless rat forward on an objective in enemy territory will make your opponent question their choices, just like putting the blue horror, I guess, forward. So use him as a bait or a fish, if you will, and you will still be able to perform decently with them. I think they are certainly at least middle of the ground warband, and so that says a lot of the power of Wyrdhollow, I think. Next up, I'm going to put the Headsman's Curse. I think these guys are pretty darn strong as well. The one caveat I would argue is that you'll have to spend some activations to sharpen the blade, and I don't think that's... I mean, I like the mechanic in a way, but I'm not a huge fan. I mean, a game of Warhammer Underworlds is played over the course of 12 activations per player, and using 2 or 3 or potentially more of those activations to just stand around sharpening a blade is pretty boring. But at the same time, if you meet Horde warbands, you will do very little sharpening because you will really not need it. But yeah, they have a lot of tricks up their sleeve and the ability to raise fighters as well. So yeah, I think they are quite potent. It's not just the leader that's a good fighter. Double hit with the scripter, you can do a lot of damage with the bear. I mean, the little one is not really strong, but at least he's 2 defense. So yeah, they're not a bad gang at all. Next up, I'm going to put Oof, yeah. I think both Domitons and Ephilims are really strong warbands here, so maybe this is even a tie, but I'm going to put Domitons next. They are certainly the most potent Stormcast warband. I'm gonna just come out and say it. They are really, really good. And magic is perhaps a bit broken at this point in time, but Domitons, I mean, they can score basically all of their cards. And yeah, I think the mechanic is very interesting, and it's a bit of a swing and a miss in learning them, I guess, but once you wrap your head around the mechanic and how to utilize the reaction to uninspire and inspire, you can have a lot of fun with this warband. They are really strong. Next up, though, I'm going to put Ephelim's Pandemonium. I think these guys are quite strong. Yeah, I think not just the leader here is a good fighter. I mean, the fact that you do extra damage versus large fighters with a big mouthy thing, and yeah, I think they are just very, very strong, right? So, and the deck overall is quite scoreable, and there's just a lot of useful stuff in there. So yeah, it's a toss-up for me between Ephelims and Domitons, but probably Ephelims is slightly stronger here. But overall, a very strong season here. So that's it. I said in the beginning that I might compare the top contenders from the different seasons, but I don't really feel like I can choose here. I mean, I could probably with certainty say that the top warbands from the first and second season does not hold up to the top contenders in the later seasons. I'm fairly certain in that, but I mean, apart from those early warbands, I think it's pretty hard, right? Probably Ephelims and Gnarl Spirit pack is up front, I guess, and then it's pretty much a toss-up between the other guys, I would argue. So yeah, probably something like this then. So yeah, there you have it. So hope you have gotten something useful out of this tier list viewing, and maybe it has helped you in choosing your warband. I am not personally a player that plays just a single warband. I go all over the place with them, and that's just how I like to utilize this game in my hobbying. But I know a lot of people that prefer playing a single warband and perfecting them basically, and there's no right or wrong way to play the game. As long as you get what you want out of it, you are doing the right thing. So until next time, take care, stay safe, bye. This is Mats again, chiming in to thank you for watching the video. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and comment, and to not miss out on future content, ring the bell as well. And if you really liked this video, feel free to click the thanks button just below this video. And if you want to support me even further, you can now become a channel member and claim the title of Critical Focus Fan. Until next time, take care, bye.